Carbohydrates and sugar are definitely not bad, but there's definitely a few things you should know about each. I guess in any context, nothing is always created equally. So there's our good quality whole grain carbohydrates. So keyword there being whole grain. So we're looking for fiber, which can be in the form of seeds, nuts, anything that's generally dark and brown. The other good forms of fiber are also our fruits and our veggies. So there's different types, but the skin of a fruit and vegetable. So all of these are what we call these good quality whole grain, high fiber carbohydrates. And they're the ones we want to be consuming regularly and on the daily. And then we've got our not so good, maybe extra tasty kind of carbohydrates, which are generally really refined. So typically they would be white and probably quite processed. And these are the ones we're wanting to limit. Doesn't mean we never eat them. So the perfect example is for most people, no matter how active or inactive you are, there's a place for carbohydrates because your brain uses 20% of total energy from that food source. Obviously, if you're more active, you do need more of them, but we do want to be having small amounts at each meal, and if we are more active, just slightly larger portions. But when it comes to the more refined options, if you are someone that trains, there really is a place for those white or more refined options quite close to your training session. You don't actually want a lot of fiber right before you're about to go for a run. It can be quite uncomfortable. And then sugar, I guess similar, like refined sugar is something we want to limit. It's not great for our overall health and eating them in large portions. But again, if you're quite an active person, they might be the types of things you see elite athletes eating right before they're about to play or in the middle of the game. And you know, I shouldn't just say elite athletes, it can be anyone that's kind of competing. So definitely knowing the what and how with that one. Breakfast, in my opinion, is the most important meal of the day, and I will caveat that by saying I generally am speaking to people who I would classify as high achievers. So whether I think about it in the performance space, and you don't have to just be an elite athlete for that, you can be someone who trains in the morning, or you can just be someone who's looking for the most out of your day. And the thing I often see with people that skip breakfast or have a sparrow-looking breakfast, which means really small, they do tend to catch up with that later in the day. But if you think about eating nothing or something very small at breakfast and then progressively getting more across the day, the exact same thing is often happening with your sugar levels, your blood sugar levels, and then that also can influence our energy levels. So in my opinion, it is the most important meal of the day because out of the three, it's probably the one that's not done correctly. And when you start to focus on the front half of the day, you'll see the return on what I call dividends. But yeah, that really refers to energy, productivity, focus, decrease in sugar cravings. If you're a sweet tooth and you crave food at night, I guarantee you're probably not a breakfast eater. So for me, it's the most important because it's the one people don't do correctly. Salt and fat are not necessarily bad, so this is definitely a depends. So chatting on salt first, depending on the type of person you are, again, if I'm thinking of quite an athletic person who eats quite well, whole foods, not particularly processed, they actually may be needing to add salt to their diet and to their food because when you're sweating a lot, you do sweat out sodium. But at the other end of the spectrum, if you're someone who is quite inactive, you maybe have some chronic conditions or high blood pressure, salt is something you do want to be mindful of and reduce. So that one is a depends on who you are and how you eat. Similar to the carbohydrate answer, fats are created differently. So we've got our good fats, which are our mono and our polyunsaturated fats. And then we've got our bad fats, so our trans and our saturated fats. So we want to focus on more of the good, in particular the polys. So these are like our oily fish, certain nuts and seeds, some plant foods, and our monounsaturateds like our extra virgin olive oil, our avocados, and lots of other nuts and seeds. So they're good health outcomes, anti-inflammatory properties. And our bad, we call them bad because they have the inverse effect on a lot of our health profiles, like our blood lipids, etc. So we want to reduce the fried foods, over-processed foods, and our deep fried foods. So they're often our saturated and our trans fats. eating after 8 p.m. will definitely not make you gain weight or fat. This is definitely a myth, and the reason I say this is because you need to look at the person and what their lifestyle looks like. So if you're someone playing sport or training at night, you're working long hours, or maybe you're a parent taking your child to training and you don't get home until 8:30, your body doesn't go, it's 8 o'clock, we can't consume food. Your body goes, I've just trained, or I haven't had my dinner and I need to get those nutrients in. So, you know, the inverse of that is if you are someone who is maybe that sparrow breakfast eater or non-breakfast eater, and you're eating a lot of your food at the back end of the day and you're not managing your appetite and you're over consuming, again, you don't need to say 8 o'clock, I don't eat, but you may just want to flip your day around and start to get a bit more at the front end of the day. So definitely a myth, but I would challenge the person to think about who they are, what their day looks like, and how they can maybe better distribute that. My opinion on soft drinks across the board, it's kind of a pick your poison. Like if you like your full strength, you know, Coca-Cola versus your Diet Coke, look, I'm not gonna say either of them have a pro, to be honest. It's probably like, which one do you prefer? And in that instance, my number one rule is we just wanna remove it or reduce it or consume as little of it as possible. You know, on one hand, you've got one which is just packed full of refined sugar, which might taste good for some people, but it isn't gonna be great for, you know, your blood sugar levels and your energy levels. And then similarly, you've got a product which is much lower in sugar. It's full of artificial sweeteners, but often we find people that consume those products are then primed to still want to consume sweet food. So it's very much a, you know, for me, in my opinion, which one do you prefer? Drink as little of it as possible. And if you are just someone who's like, well, what's fizzy and delicious that I can replace just plain old water with? Like your mineral waters, kombuchas, those types of drinks are your better options. So in my opinion, neither are good, and it's definitely a reduce and remove as much as possible. Every single person, 50% or more of them is made up of water. So when you think about it like that, you can start to grasp why hydration is important. But in saying that, like anything, too much of a good thing can potentially be not a good thing. And it is absolutely extreme kind of circumstances, but there is a condition called hyponatremia, and it tends to happen when people are drinking a lot of water and also sweating out a lot of salt or sodium. So long distance, really like endurance-based runners are at risk of this. So, you know, again, it's probably not everybody and just the normal person. So you're highly unlikely to overconsume if you just kind of day to day. But if you're someone drinking massive, like liters upon liters upon liters, know that it's not necessarily going to be a good thing for you. So general guidelines, 2.1 litres for women, 2.6 litres for men, and then on top of that, if you're a heavy sweater, if you're training a lot, etc. I love talking about protein and protein intake, and while it's definitely true that this is the main nutrient that helps with gaining muscle, the most important thing about this is how you consume it. So total amount, we actually know most people get enough, but it's how they consume it. So we actually want to have a more even distribution across the day. And what we know is that most people don't get enough at breakfast and snacks, and they overconsume at dinner. So what I challenge people in this space is to redistribute some of that protein from lunch and dinner. And that doesn't physically mean having half your steak at breakfast. That means just being aware of your protein-rich foods, which are animal-based ones, are anything that comes from an animal. So our dairy products, eggs, chicken, fish, beef, etc. Then we've also got our plant options, which are like our tofu or soy-based products, lentils and legumes, some nuts and seeds as well. So what we want to aim for, look, depending on who you are, if you're active or an adult, it's generally in the realm of 15 to 20 grams at a minimum for breakfast. If you're really active, hitting the gym quite a lot, and you're a male, it potentially is up to around 40 grams. And then also at snacks, we want to get a little hit as well. So aiming for around that 15 to 20 grams. So incredibly important in the process of gaining muscle mass, but it's not more at the one meal. It's about that spread and distribution and consuming it regularly, because that turns on the pathway which helps us gain muscle mass. And the more we do that repeatedly and consistently, the more muscle and more strength that you will gain. The number of meals you should eat a day is always an interesting one. And again, look, I don't discount that different things work for different people, but in my, I guess, experience working with lots of different people, I guess the common denominator being what I would call high achievers. They're generally people just looking to get the most out of themselves and lives, be it work, sport, or whatever. I do find that 3 meals a day and typically 1 good snack is a general good baseline. And the reason I say that is I don't doubt that people can just kind of have 2 meals and get through, but I don't think we're looking to just survive. I think we're looking to thrive, and each opportunity to eat a well-balanced meal, and you know, well-balanced is a bit of a loose term that gets thrown around. So for me, I like to tell people all the elements of what you should aim for at your main meals, which is your colors, so fruits or veggies, your carbohydrates, those whole grain carbohydrates, which are fantastic, some protein, which is not only about building muscle and recovery, it's also the most important nutrient, appetite control. So if we get more of that regularly, you're more likely to be quite satisfied and eat regularly and consistently across the day. And the secondary effect of that is, you know, how you feel and function and your energy levels. And then the fourth one being some healthy fats. So if we get each of those, and you know, predominantly the protein, color, carbs with a little bit of healthy fats at our 3 meals and 1 snack, you're nailing it. The one thing I will say, sometimes people like to use, you know, maybe skip a breakfast if they're trying to do like an intermittent fasting type thing. And in my experience, I'm not sitting here saying everyone should go and do that, but you know, pending your medical conditions and who you are, I do sometimes see that being utilised in maybe someone like a corporate who might often go to dinners and functions, and they're looking to manage their weight and lifestyle, but you know, for a strategy on how to do that. So it's not an everyday thing, but yeah, look, generally across the board, 3 meals and 1 good snack is what most people's good baseline framework should look like. Sports drinks definitely can be a bit of a controversial one, and this is more of a it depends, surprise, surprise. So if you are someone playing sport or training regularly, there can be a place for sports drinks. And look, you know, the sports drink kind of industry, there's a lot of different ones out there now, not just maybe the 1 or 2 everyone knows about. So there is a place for a sports drink if you are, yeah, like I said, playing in a game or a tournament, or if you're training for 90 minutes or more in a session. The good thing about a traditional sports drink is it ticks the 3 goals we're looking for in a performance, so like particularly in a game or a match. So we get carbohydrates for fuel, we get fluid because we're sweating and we need to replace some, and we get some electrolytes which we sweat out in our sweat as well. So it ticks those 3 boxes. What that doesn't mean is just if you're playing a 30-minute maybe game of soccer or touch or that kind of thing with your mates, you don't need to be necessarily having a sports drink. So it's definitely a depends. For me, there is a place and a space for them, as I've kind of said, but it's not necessarily everyone should be having a sports drink for every session, every game, every kind of activity. And I guess similarly, it can kind of go for the before or after. Like some people can use them as a fuel, but I would say that's really only when we're looking for a performance outcome. And similarly after, it can be used to replace and refuel, but it's not my primary choice. When it comes to fat loss, the main thing that needs to be considered is definitely being in an energy deficit. So the equation of energy in, energy out is definitely one that we need to consider. It's the number one factor when it comes to shifting fat loss. But then there are other factors that we need to, look at how we're eating. So some of the tips around spreading your food out, getting a combination of all the elements, the protein, the whole grain, the colors, all of that contributes to also body composition overall. So, when a lot of people want to lose weight, they do want to target fat loss over muscle. So those strategies help. And then when it comes to the type of training that we're doing, I find in most instances, moving more is probably what most people need to do. And then if you're really kind of diving in and looking at the types of training and heart rates, like that can be a factor. But when it comes to the absolute number one thing, energy deficit is the most important thing when it comes to losing fat. If an athlete could only eat one meal for the rest of their life, I would be recommending a poke bowl. And the reason for that is when I talk to elite athletes, or to be honest, anyone and everyone, I've got a formula which will literally transform your life on how you're eating and how you'll feel, which is looking at getting 4 key elements at each meal. And those 4 elements are protein, which the most important reason for that is appetite control. It's also really important for like any kind of recovery in the body or any structure, muscles, skin, hair, nails, etc. We want our whole grain carbohydrates, which are our body's main fuel source, not just physically, but for our brain as well. And also our gut health, the high fiber foods, our little good gut bugs absolutely love and feast away on and grow more of the good stuff. So we love that. The colours, which are our fruits and our veggies. We know that only 8% or less than of Australian adults are eating enough veggies, and less than 5% of Australian children, which is quite a mind-blowing stat. So for me, simply saying if a meal or snack is only brown and white, it's not complete. It's a way for you to have on your radar to look at your breakfast. You know, are you just a cereal and milk kind of person, or an eggs and toast? You know, at your lunch, are you just buying like a burrito bowl and getting some chicken and brown rice but not too much salad? Like if that's you, just start by looking at how you can add some colour. So for me, poke bowl's stacking up on all 3 of those at the moment. Protein from, let's go with salmon, because I'm going to talk about healthy fats next. We've got our brown rice or quinoa, or ideally a blend of, so fibre, carbs, love that. So do our gut bugs. Lots of colours, we're ticking off, you know, a component of that vegetable intake. And that as well helps fill us up. It's the food that also helps us feel good, both instantaneously and also just across the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, and across our life. These are the foods that give us the micronutrients. So, you know, the difference with like a protein and a carbohydrate and our last element, which I'll chat on soon, fats, these are what we call macronutrients. So they actually provide energy to the body. Every gram we consume gives us physical energy, or kilojoules or calories, you might have heard the term. Whereas our micronutrients are like our vitamins and our minerals, our antioxidants, and they don't have an energy value. So when we consume them, we're not consuming calories or kilojoules, but we're consuming micronutrients which help with the breakdown and functions. They're what we call cofactors of those other big ones. So, you know, for most people, I don't go into that detail. So if that's too much for you, just go framework, protein, carbohydrates, whole grain ones, colours, and lucky last, we want our healthy fats. So we've gone with a smoked salmon poke bowl here. So or smoked salmon or cooked salmon, whatever, or a sashimi style salmon, pick your option there. But it naturally contains healthy fats in that polyunsaturated form. So aside from having anti-inflammatory properties, having that healthy fat intake also helps with the absorption of other types of nutrients like our fat-soluble vitamins, so our A, E, D, and K. So again, you know, if we're thinking our 4 elements, we've got our poke bowl representing all of them really, really well. And then if we want to take it to the next level, looking at, you know, ratios. So for most people, knowing they don't eat enough colour, if we even start with having an equal amount of, you know, protein, carbs, and colour, and a little bit of healthy fats, about a tablespoon or so worth. But otherwise, you know, if you are then taking it to the next level, and say you're someone who's not doing much training, or you may be aiming to shift your fat loss a little bit, we might then adjust those ratios a little bit, you know, dial up the colour, dial back the carbohydrates. We don't remove it, but we just adjust. But the protein stays the same, which is where a lot of people go wrong. So it's not if we train more or train less, we need more or less protein. It is the one consistent element or macronutrient that you should be consuming the same amount of each meal and snack. That doesn't mean consume the exact same thing, even though I know this question is what is the one meal, but it just means we want to have about the same amount of protein. And again, whether you're active or whether you're just someone looking to feel better, it'll help you recover, it'll help optimize your body comp, and it will also, most importantly and most applicably to everyone, help sustain your appetite, and then which helps sustain your energy levels. So for me, my one meal would be a poke bowl. If this was a matter of life or death, obviously I'm not saying everyone go and eat only a poke bowl for the rest of your life, but explaining why that would be my answer to that question if I had to pick one. Okay, so a meat kebab, here I'm gonna have to give my little diplomatic, is this, we're cooking at home with some like souvlaki skewers, or are we, 2 a.m. at the corner shop getting a bit of a greasy kebab? So quality definitely matters. The thing I like about a kebab is you do get a representation of all 4 elements. So you get protein from the meat, preferably a good quality one that you're cooking at home. You get some carbohydrates from the wrap. Again, preferably you're choosing a whole grain one to get the whole grain, otherwise those white ones are really refined. Tabbouleh, salads, we're getting colors, and then depending what sauces we're putting on top, we're getting some fat. So that might be controversial that I've kind of said that, but yeah, preferably cooking it at home, choosing good quality meat and wraps, and there could be worse things. So an omelette is great. I definitely think people, this is a meal, for some people a snack. An omelette on its own with eggs and veggies only represents 3 of the elements. So we get some protein, really important. We get some healthy fats naturally in the egg yolk, so we get that. We get some colors because we've added veggies to our omelette. But I'm going to assume that we're serving that with a nice good quality sourdough to kind of complete that meal. So in that context, great, yes, eat it, very good option. It's definitely true what they say, not all salads are created equally, and while a chicken Caesar salad has a representation from each of the elements, it's going to be one that I say we want to limit because it's packed full of fats, but not the good ones. Often the bad saturated ones we want to limit, and it doesn't necessarily have much diversity there. So grilled chicken, that's pretty good. Too much fat in my opinion. The croutons are deep fried, so we're not really ideally aiming for that. And then there's a whole heap of lettuce. So for me, that's a no. Let's replace that with a nice grainy salad, lots of colors, lean proteins, maybe some falafels, dress it in some extra virgin olive oil. All the elements, delicious, nutritious. Love it.